Welcome to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. My name is Roman Madaus, and today we have with us Nasir Ahmad Andisha, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Foreign Minister, he was Ambassador to Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. Your Excellency, today I'd like to start off our discussion by asking you about Afghanistan's current challenges. For decades, Afghanistan has been involved in large-scale nation building, and I'd like you to comment on the current progress of that and challenges to that.
Thank you very much. Thanks. First of all, let me thank the Australian Institute of International Affairs for having me here. Yes, Afghanistan's, if I call it the state building, basically nation building is probably, much more elaborate phrase to use it here, is that we started since 2001, since the fall of Taliban, and the state institutions were created. We opted for a presidential system, a parliament, a bicameral parliament, an independent judicial system. So it started very well, like any other projects at the very beginning. It was a very successful project of the state building. Economic recovery was very swift. The roads, infrastructures were built in the very first years. People were very hopeful. A new constitution was drafted. But then it's the transitions that is always problematic. If you look at the even history of the state building, it's after some time, normally after a decade, that you can either revert back to chaos and the problems will surface, or in very few cases, you will continue and transitioning and consolidating the process of state building. So Afghanistan, due to different challenges, especially the challenges of insurgency, the challenges of the terrorism that we were all fighting together in that region, the challenges of centuries of the terrorism on the other side of Afghanistan's border, that they actually completely did not disappear. It just stayed there, rested, recuperated, and came back. So the process of state building faced great challenges because when we engaged in fighting the terrorists who were coming back to Afghanistan, the Taliban and the remnants of Al-Qaeda, of course, you have to compromise some other parts of the whole idea of state building, because when security comes first, then because of the scarcity of resources, then you have to allocate your resources somewhere else. You have to divert your attentions into the security, building the security forces, training your army, because that's also part of a very important institution. So that's why our attention was diverted. So basically, if I sum it up, we were fighting and building an army. We were fighting and building a state. So that's why we faced enormous challenges after the first decade of state building.
Next, I'd like to move on to the world economy. I want to ask you if recently falling commodities prices have greatly influenced or influenced at all foreign interest in tapping Afghanistan's vast mineral wealth.
I think the answer basically or broadly is yes. Because as you have alluded in your question, that's I think one of the major sources of potentials of Afghanistan, coming out of this state of being a less developed country, dependent entirely on foreign aid, on its development projects, on infrastructure, but also on supporting its national security forces. So coming out of this situation, the road ahead was using the Afghan minerals, extracting this and putting it into the market and finance our own expenditure from this, and this will lead to economic growth and development. Yes, in 2008, 2009, there was very large scale interest in the minerals and mining in Afghanistan. We leased one of the major copper projects that we had in Afghanistan to a Chinese company. There was interest in Afghanistan modest oil and gas sector, and there was interest in many other rare earth elements that we had. But yes, the decrease in the commodity in one hand and an increase in the insecurity on the other hand reduced the interest and brought down the level of investments and even to some extent killed the potentials of other investments from sort of a diversified a portfolio of investors. Like, for example, it was very difficult for us in 2011 and 12 to really, find myself as an ambassador to here to convince major companies to go out and invest in Afghanistan. So that had its impact, and of course it will continue to have its impact if the commodity price is the same level that it is right now.
That makes sense. Well, one bright spot in Afghanistan's near-term economic future is the World Trade Organization accession talks that are occurring right now as we speak. How does that have potential for Afghanistan's economy going forward?
I think it's in next week that Afghanistan is joining WTO as an official member after almost 10 years of negotiation. So we joined WTO. It will have, I think several impacts, and the most, to me, it seems that the most important one of this is mostly symbolic, because you're joining, the main body of world trade. You're becoming a full member of, a family of major trading countries. But what practical benefits it will bring to Afghanistan is probably not that very much. It's not a game changer in Afghanistan joining WTO. In some areas it helps, like for example that we can have our own brand. The exports will be much more easier to different countries. We'll get access. We don't need to really go through other countries and have our commodities being value added in places like Pakistan and Iran, because our main commodities are going there, and then the value added happened there, and then it's packaged under the name of that country because they're members of WTO. I think we will now have direct access to world markets. It increases our competitive advantage because, of course, there are very few areas that Afghanistan has an advantage, like in the gems, in the jewelry sector, in the precious and semi-precious stones, in the carpets and rugs, dry fruits, and some of the other herbs and such stuff. So I think in this area we can have our own brand, and we can have direct export. I think it also decreases the because Afghanistan is mostly an import economy where we import most of our commodities from the food to everything else. So I think the decrease in the prices, because there will be less of transit and hurdles and barriers to trade inside Afghanistan, hopefully. I think the commodity price and the consumer prices will come down, which is good. Not very much good for the economy as general, but good for the people, for the consumers. And finally, I think technical assistance. WTO offers technical assistance in terms of building the capacity of your trade and your departments, which leads the commerce. I think there are some benefits, certainly.
Moving on to security, you alluded to earlier the security situation. ISIS is a challenge in many parts of the world, but for Afghanistan specifically, how do you expect ISIS will, if at all, affect the security situation going forward?
ISIS is already making some inroads in the eastern part of Afghanistan, and they have announced a province of Khorasan, which is the old name of Afghanistan itself, there, and there's some terrorists formerly affiliated to the Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, and some of the other, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and some local people, and including some of the people who have been previously in Guantanamo Bay in the prison, and they have been in touch with the IS Central. They have created, they have carved some area for themselves in eastern Afghanistan, though it's limited. But it's more. Our concern is more with the IS's message, which unfortunately resonates among the rather educated but unemployed youth in that part of the world, but in many parts of the world, including Australia. If it's not like only very uneducated and layman kind of person will go and join IS. You know, it's that message that even the educated and semi-educated people will find it attractive. I think that is the main problem, because Afghanistan has a youth bulge. It's more than 65% of the Afghans are below age of 30, and if the message resonates with this group of young people, and if they could attract them to this very sort of although how much reality is embedded in this message, but of course the youth, as youth, we are more idealistic. So that message resonates among these people and attracts them to this very glorious past of the Khilafat and things like that. I think that's very dangerous, because it creates foot soldiers for them, both armed and unarmed. Even unarmed, they could easily be lured into their ranks. So I think that's a very dangerous phenomenon. And even the splinter groups of Al-Qaeda who used to live in Pakistan and now they're moving across the border, the Central Asian groups of the Uzbekistan movement, the Chinese Uyghurs, the remnants of the Al-Qaeda, the Arabs and the Chechens. So everybody is now mostly rallying around the message of IS, and they're raising the black flag. So I think that will be a very dangerous phenomena for Afghanistan in the next year.
Well, building on that, do you think that Afghanistan is on track to provide security for itself after the foreign forces are expected to withdraw in 2017? And what do you see as the major challenges in meeting that demand for security going forward?
You see, the provision of security since 2014, basically it's the Afghan security forces now in almost 2 years that they're providing security for the Afghans. Because the mission of the ISAF, the International Security Forces, that a combination of different countries, including led by NATO, has stopped being engaged directly in fighting in Afghanistan. So effectively, it's the Afghan security forces which provide security and fights with Taliban and all these groups that I named. But then the challenges that we faced in a couple of months back in Afghanistan, and the challenges that we are continue facing in Afghanistan, it tells us that we certainly need the support of the international forces in Afghanistan. Their presence has been extended. The 12,000 plus soldiers that they were supposed to be drawing down to half of that number in 2016. I think the mandate as sort of stays the same in 2016. The drawdown has stopped already. And there will be discussions on how to maintain the same level of force and increasing the air support, the intelligence support, the reconnaissance support, the surveillance support for the Afghan National Security Forces. I think cases like Kunduz shows that still our national security forces, while they can fight at the infantry level very bravely, but on the air support, on the other areas, on the enabler areas and on the intelligence areas, they need continued support of the international forces, including the Australian forces in Afghanistan. And I think the next year NATO summit in Warsaw, in Poland, will make a decision about this.
Well, we'd certainly like to wish Afghanistan all the best with that going forward in the year 2016. And thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us today, and thank you for watching. If you would like more information, please go to www.internationalaffairs.org.au.